So I don't really have a good space to run the saws in the house without generating a lot of dust that gets all over things, therefore requiring a lot of cleanup. So what I want to do today is I want to make a workbench that is portable so I can use it outside, do most of the projects here, then move everything back inside when I'm done. Beyond just the convenience of not having to clean up everything every time I use the saw in the house, it's a matter of safety, because as you saw in the other video, when I was running this for the first time with the full-size sheet of plywood, it was extremely sketchy trying to get that thing balanced, especially not having a runoff table or something here on the side to support it while I was making the cuts. For both a cleanliness, convenience standpoint and from a safety, don't want to lose my finger standpoint and get a better precision cut as well at the same time, having a workbench that I can take out here is going to be a good thing for me to have. Now that said, with my goals, obviously I want it to be portable, which is going to be lightweight. It's going to have to be at the right height so that I can run off everything. It's going to be sturdy enough that it can support the miter saw, because I'm going to put that on top of it too. So lightweight, sturdy, portable, those are kind of our main goals for today. And because it's a workbench, it doesn't have to be super pretty. It's just got to be functional, so we don't need the highest grade oak everything. We just need something that functions very well. With those goals in mind, what we have for materials, I got this one 8-foot 2x4, these 3 smaller sections that are cut up left over from another project. I've got about 8 additional 2x4s. I've got 2 sawhorse brackets, and I've got a good sized sheet of plywood. That is a 3-foot by 8-foot section of plywood, and that fit in the back of the wagon. It was very tight. It was all the way to the front, but I was amazed. The whole thing fit in. All of this took one trip. But anyway, let's get going on the project. Using the leftover 2x4s from my other project, I checked the height of the sawhorse relative to the height of the table saw, then started trimming down the legs of the table saw at a 15-degree angle on the miter saw until I had the correct height. The piece of plywood on top of the table saw here is the same thickness as the top of my workbench. That way I know the top of my workbench will be the same height as the top of the table saw. After getting the correct leg length, I cut all 8 legs for this table and then screwed them in place in the sawhorse brackets. After this, I'll screw into place the crossbar at the top of the sawhorses, but I'll only screw that in on one side. That way when I pick it up, the legs on one side will fold in and it'll take up less space, making it easily transported when I'm taking it back inside. Using the sawhorses in the narrow strip of our BC sheet of plywood, I cut the top of our table to the correct length that we want. After deciding where I want the sawhorses to normally sit under this table, I cut the I-beams to length so that it supports the entire length between the 2 sawhorse positions. On top of that, you'll notice that I'm positioning these a few inches in from the edge. That way when we're working on something, if we need to clamp it to the top of the table to keep it secure while we're screwing it or working on it or sanding it or whatever, the I-beam won't interfere with us clamping it to the edge, and we'll have plenty of space to clamp it down. After pre-drilling the screw holes, I then screw the I-beam in place after applying a healthy amount of wood glue. Now, using the small scrap pieces we have left over from trimming earlier, I'm making a surround for the sawhorses. That way they won't shift around if it's on an unlevel surface such as the lawn. After pre-drilling the holes for the screws, we can apply our wood glue and then screw these blocks into place. After doing this on both sides of the table, we're then ready to set the table up and our construction is finished. It's been a while since I've made this table, and looking back, I should have pre-drilled the holes into the blocks as well for the screws to prevent them from splitting. After several uses, some of them did start to crack, but here's a quick close-up to show how the sawhorses fit into those pockets. This is the completed workbench. This is actually quite stable, even though the legs are not even because my yard is kind of a disaster. I'm actually really happy with how this came out. The 2 beams that I got going under it actually give it a very good amount of support and rigidity along the length of it. And that's perfect. That's exactly what I wanted for this. I will probably go back and just do a quick sanding on this top at some point just so it's a little less rough. And then that way too, I can remove a lot of the splinters from the screw holes. I'll make sure all those are flush enough and that I'm not going to catch anything on it as I'm working on it. Now, looking at what I've got left for wood, I got about a 3x3 section. I got that long strip still. Then for the 2x4s, I had 8 here. I had the one on the other side as well as those 3 shorter lengths. So I still have one of the shorter lengths left, but I effectively used 5 boards. If you're trying to do this project, I would buy probably 6 just so you know you have enough. I would have probably used 1 or 2 boards less if my table was a little bit shorter just because of the length of those H-beams that I got underneath, or I-beams, whatever you want to call them. Now I have the work table actually set up next to the table saw, and granted, again, it's not on the level surface between this concrete pad over here and on the yard over there, but it does seem to be almost exactly at the height I want it. Sliding across over here, yeah, it's pretty consistent around that, but it does have an angle that it goes down as it gets closer to us, so it's not really unexpected. So I'm actually quite happy with how it came out. Again, that's pretty stable, and the total cost of everything so far has been about $60, give or take, including the sawhorse brackets. So that's kind of tough to beat for the price. Anyway, that's all I got for this episode. Thank you guys again for watching. But that's not all I have for this episode, because I did another project right afterwards and decided to stain this. The wood is now all stained. I'm going to give it a few more minutes to dry. After it's dry, I'm going to pull it all up, get it inside where I can assemble it. And then because this can is just about dead anyway, I'm going to continue pouring it over the top and just stain the rest of this workbench. And then that way I'll have one color instead of a conglomerate of different finishes after doing a project in different sections. On top of that, the stain I like to use because it's dark and it hides things well. For that reason, I think it will also be good on the top of this workbench because I am going to be doing some various other projects that will involve painting or getting glue on it, stuff like that in the future.
I cleaned off everything else from the workbench, and then I donned my respirator and I poured the remainder of this can of stain onto the top of the bench. After spreading it, it was clear that this wasn't going to be enough coverage to get the entire top, so what I had to do was take another can that I had on hand of the same finish, mix that thoroughly, and then use that to finish off the rest of this table. I used this can to finish staining the top and the sides of this table, that way the top and side match, because if I had them different colors, it would just look really weird and bother me constantly.
The table is now stained. It's not completely perfect. They didn't really bother getting too deep into all of the divots. And you can see there's a couple little smaller granular areas where there's still some of the original wood showing through. Same kind of thing on the end. There's not really a perfect coverage all the way around, but that's okay because it is still just a workbench. But as it sits now, I'm pretty happy with it. I do like the darker color because it's going to cover up a lot of the stains and stuff that I'm going to get on this, as well as when I'm working with wood, it's actually going to have a good contrast so I can actually see what I'm doing, and if there's any small pieces, I'll be able to locate them more easily. So there you go. Workbench is done for now. Thank you for watching.